Wyoming Territory, 1879. The early October wind carried the promise of a bitter winter, sweeping down from the Bighorn Mountains with a vengeance that stripped the cottonwoods bare along the riverbanks. Beau Zimmerman sat atop his paint horse, scanning the darkening horizon as charcoal clouds gathered and rolled above him. At 25, he had already spent 7 years working cattle across 3 territories, with nothing to show for it but calloused hands, a decent horse, and a solitude that had settled into his bones like winter chill. "World's too wild for settling, Cobalt," he muttered to his horse, whose ears flicked back at the sound of his voice. "Man puts down roots out here. All he gets is disappointment." Beau had learned that lesson watching his father toil for 15 years on a hardscrabble homestead in Nebraska, only to lose everything to drought and bank foreclosure. When they buried his mother that same winter, something in Beau had hardened, calcified. He'd ridden west at 18, determined never to be tethered to land, home, or heart. The cowboy life suited him. Seasonal work, open country, no attachments. If loneliness sometimes gnawed at him during the endless night watches on the range, he'd learned to ignore it. A flash of lightning illuminated the landscape, revealing a small wagon about a quarter-mile ahead, tilted precariously off the rutted trail. Beau squinted, then urged Cobalt forward when he saw movement. Probably some fool homesteader caught out in the storm. He considered riding past. Their poor planning wasn't his problem, but another jagged bolt showed a slight figure struggling with a frightened horse. "Damn it all," he muttered, spurring Cobalt into a trot. Whatever his feelings about settlers, he couldn't leave someone to the mercy of what looked to be a monster storm brewing. As he approached, he saw a young woman in a dark blue dress, her blonde hair coming loose from its pins as she fought to calm a panicked bay horse. The wagon's back axle had broken, leaving it listing dangerously to one side. "Miss," he called over the rising wind, "you need to unhitch that animal before the storm hits full." She whirled, startled by his voice. Her face, even pinched with worry, struck something in him. Blue eyes wide as summer sky, features delicate but determined. "I know that," she called back, voice steady despite her predicament. "But the harness is stuck, and I cannot get it free." Beau swung down from Cobalt and secured his reins to a scrubby sage. He approached carefully, noting how she positioned herself between him and the wagon. Smart woman, cautious of strangers. "Name's Beau Zimmerman. I ride for the Rocking L. Let me help before we're both drowned." He gestured to the darkening sky. "Tessa Ellis," she replied after a moment's hesitation. "The pin is jammed in the trace. I was trying to reach my brother's place before the storm." Beau assessed the situation quickly. The wagon axle was beyond repair without tools and dry conditions. The horse was lathered with fear and exertion, and the first heavy raindrops had begun to fall, driven sideways by the strengthening wind. "Your brother's place. How far?" he asked, working to free the tangled harness. "About 5 miles north, near Elk Creek. Won't make it before this hits proper." The pin finally gave way under his strength, and the horse lurched forward, nearly bowling Tessa over. Beau caught her arm instinctively, steadying her. Their eyes met briefly before she stepped away. "Thank you. I can manage now." "With all due respect, Miss Ellis, you cannot. This storm's going to be a gully washer. Line shack's about a mile west. Not much, but it's dry." As if punctuating his words, thunder cracked overhead, and the skies opened. Rain fell in sheets, instantly soaking them both. The horse reared, eyes rolling. "Take what you need from the wagon," Beau shouted over the deluge. "I'll get the horse." 20 minutes later, they arrived at the small line shack, a crude but solid structure nestled in a stand of pines. Beau had managed to lead both horses, while Tessa carried a small carpet bag and what looked like provisions wrapped in oilcloth. They were both drenched to the skin, teeth chattering in the sudden cold that accompanied the storm. Inside, Beau worked quickly to light the pot-bellied stove with the dry kindling stacked beside it. The one-room cabin was spare but serviceable, a narrow cot against one wall, a rough table with 2 chairs, shelves stocked with basic supplies. "You can hang your dress by the stove," he said, purposely keeping his back to her as he built up the fire. "There's probably a blanket in that trunk. I'll see to the horses." When he returned from the lean-to where he'd secured and rubbed down the animals, Tessa had changed into dry undergarments with a blanket wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her blonde hair, freed from its pins, hung in damp waves down her back. Her dress and petticoats steamed gently beside the now crackling stove. "I apologize for the circumstances, Mr. Zimmerman," she said formally, though her voice held a trace of humor. "This is hardly proper. Reckon propriety takes second place to survival out here," he replied, removing his sodden coat, but keeping his wet shirt and denims on. He would endure the discomfort rather than add to her unease. "How old are you, Miss Ellis?" 22. "And yourself?" 25 this past June. He busied himself with the coffee pot, trying not to notice how the firelight played across her features. "What brings you out to these parts?" "Most young ladies prefer civilization." A shadow crossed her face. "My parents died last spring. Influenza. I was teaching school in Pennsylvania, but my brother Thomas is my only family now. He wrote that Wyoming needs teachers." Beau nodded, recognizing the familiar weight of loss in her voice. "Sorry about your folks." "Thank you." She accepted the tin mug of coffee he offered. "You mentioned you ride for the Rocking L? Have you been in Wyoming long?" 3 years with the outfit. Before that, Nebraska, Montana, Colorado. He shrugged. "I go where the work is." "No home, then?" "Home is where I hang my hat," he replied with the practiced ease of a man who had given the same answer countless times. But something about saying it to Tessa, with her direct gaze and the simple gold locket she wore that suggested family connections, made the words feel hollow. The storm raged through the night, wind howling around the cabin's eaves like a living thing. They talked by the stove's light. Careful conversation at first, then gradually more open. Beau found himself telling her about his father's failed homestead, his mother's gentle strength, the loneliness of the trail. Tessa spoke of her teaching, her parents' bookshop in Philadelphia, her brother's letters describing Wyoming's wild beauty. "I was afraid," she admitted as midnight approached. "Coming west alone. But sometimes fear must be faced, don't you think?" Beau stared into the red coals of the fire. "Some fears are worth facing. Others just get you killed." "Like what?" she pressed gently. "Like thinking you can tame this country. Like believing you can build something permanent in a place that takes more than it gives." He looked up, surprised by his own candor. "Sorry, that's not very encouraging for someone just arrived." "No," she said thoughtfully, "but it's honest. I appreciate that more than false promises." When they finally slept, Beau on the floor wrapped in his saddle blanket, Tessa on the narrow cot. Something had shifted in the small cabin. Like the storm outside, a barrier had broken, allowing something unexpected to flow through. The morning dawned clear and cold, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Beau rode with Tessa to her brother's homestead, helping salvage what they could from her wagon along the way. Thomas Ellis, a bearded man of about 30 with the same blue eyes as his sister, greeted them with relief and suspicion in equal measure. "Thank you for seeing my sister safe," he said stiffly after the introductions. "Anyone would have done the same," Beau replied, already backing toward Cobalt, ready to return to the familiar solitude of the range. Tessa stepped forward. "Mr. Zimmerman, I'm in your debt. I hope you'll visit when you're near Elk Creek again." Something in her direct gaze, in the quiet dignity of her posture despite her ordeal, made Beau hesitate. "Maybe I will, Miss Ellis. Weather permitting." He tipped his hat and rode away, telling himself he wouldn't be back. The Ellis homestead lay far from his regular routes, and getting tangled with settlers only led to complications. Yet 3 weeks later, he found himself riding toward Elk Creek, a sack of coffee beans and a book of poetry he'd traded for in town secured in his saddlebags. Thomas Ellis eyed him warily when he arrived, but Tessa's face brightened in a way that made Beau's chest tighten. She had secured a position teaching at the small school in the nearest town, she told him over supper, riding 4 miles each way. "It's only 6 children now, but more families are coming," she said, her enthusiasm evident. "Wyoming needs education if it's to grow properly." "You planning on staying then?" Beau asked, trying to sound casual. "I am. This country has a wildness, yes, but also possibility." She looked at him directly. "Not everything built here fails, Mr. Zimmerman." The words followed him back to the ranch, echoing in his mind during long night watches and quiet rides. Throughout the winter, he found reasons to ride near Elk Creek, delivering messages, tracking strays, checking fence lines no one had asked him to inspect. Each visit deepened something he wasn't ready to name. Tessa never seemed surprised to see him, always offering coffee and conversation. She told him about her students, the community's struggles and triumphs, the letter she'd received about a proper schoolhouse being built in spring. He found himself sharing more than he ever had with anyone. Stories of cattle drives and stampedes, the stillness of dawn on the high plains, his secret drawings of landscapes he kept rolled in his saddlebags. "You have an artist's eye," she said, examining his rough sketches one February afternoon as they sat in her brother's cabin. Thomas was in town for supplies, and the propriety of their meeting alone was saved only by the bitter cold that required the door remain open despite the fire. "Have you ever thought of putting down roots, Beau? Finding a place to develop this talent?" "Cowboys don't put down roots," he replied automatically, but the words lacked conviction. "Anyway, drawings don't feed a man. Neither does loneliness," she said quietly, returning his sketch. Their fingers brushed, and neither pulled away immediately. The spring cattle drive took Beau away for 6 weeks. He told himself the separation would clear his head, restore his certainty about the wandering life. Instead, he found himself counting days until his return, wondering if Tessa's school had received its new roof, if she still wore her hair in that simple knot at the nape of her neck, if she thought of him at all. When he finally rode back to Elk Creek in late May, the landscape transformed by wildflowers and new grass, Tessa wasn't at the homestead. "Town meeting," Thomas explained, more friendly than during Beau's first visits. "Some trouble about the school. Minors' kids causing disruptions, and the company man saying education's a waste for laborers' children." Beau found her outside the general store, facing down a red-faced man in an expensive coat. 5 other men stood nearby, listening to the heated exchange. "These children deserve education regardless of their father's occupations, Mr. Hargrove," Tessa was saying, her voice firm despite being a head shorter than the man she addressed. "The school board agreed. The board can be persuaded to reconsider," Hargrove cut in, "especially when they understand how much mining revenue contributes to this community." Beau dismounted quietly, moving to stand slightly behind Tessa. She glanced over her shoulder, surprise and relief flashing across her face before she turned back to Hargrove. "Is there a problem here?" Beau asked mildly, though he let his hand rest near his holster. Hargrove looked him up and down, taking in the dust of the trail, the weather-beaten hat, the quiet confidence of a man who had faced down worse than mining company bullies. "This isn't cowboy business," he snapped. "Miss Ellis is a friend," Beau replied. "That makes it my business." Something in his tone made Hargrove step back. "We'll continue this discussion with the board, Miss Ellis," he said stiffly before stalking away, his companions following. "Thank you," Tessa said when they were alone. "Though I could have handled it." "No doubt," Beau agreed, surprising himself with a smile. "But I've missed watching you stand your ground. It's quite something." Her answering smile warmed him more than the spring sunshine. They walked together toward her brother's wagon, speaking of the weeks they'd been apart. Beau found himself telling her about his decision to leave the Rocking L when the season ended. "The foreman at the bar cross offered me work," he explained. "Better pay, and they're closer to Elk Creek." "Closer to the school," Tessa noted, her eyes searching his. "Is that important to you?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning Beau couldn't ignore. "It is," he admitted finally. "You've made it important." That summer passed in a haze of long evenings and stolen moments. Beau worked from dawn to dusk, then rode miles to spend an hour with Tessa on her brother's porch. They walked along Elk Creek, attended the small town's Independence Day celebration, spoke of books and dreams and the country's changing face. Slowly, carefully, Beau began to imagine a different future, not just endless seasons on other men's cattle, but perhaps a small place of his own. Each time the old fear resurfaced, that attachment meant vulnerability, that the country would eventually take everything he built. Tessa's steady presence challenged it. "The land is harsh," she acknowledged one evening as they watched the sunset paint the distant mountains gold and crimson. "But not everything beautiful is permanent, Beau. Sometimes the value is in the creating, not how long it lasts." In late July, Beau rode into town to find it buzzing with grim news. A mine collapse had trapped 12 men, including Hargrove and 3 fathers of Tessa's students. Without thinking, he joined the rescue effort, spending 36 grueling hours helping dig through fallen rock and timber. When they finally broke through to the trapped men, Beau was among the first to enter the unstable tunnel. He helped carry out injured miners, including Hargrove himself, whose leg had been crushed. The man gripped Beau's arm as they emerged into daylight. "Why?" he gasped through his pain. "After how I treated the teacher. Your woman. Because that's what neighbors do." Beau replied simply, surprised to find he meant it. The rescue transformed Hargrove's attitude toward the school, and more importantly, it shifted something fundamental in Beau. As he watched the community rally around its wounded, as he saw Tessa tending injuries and organizing women to provide food for the rescuers, he realized his belief that the frontier only took was wrong. Here, before his eyes, was proof that even in the harshest circumstances, people could come together, could build something meaningful, if fleeting. A week later, Beau rode to the Ellis homestead with a purpose. Thomas nodded solemnly when Beau asked to speak privately with Tessa, something like approval in his eyes. They walked to a stand of cottonwoods by the creek, late summer light filtering through the leaves. Beau had rehearsed words, but they deserted him now, faced with the reality of this woman who had somehow slipped past all his careful defenses. "I'm thinking of buying the Simmons place," he said finally. "The old man's going back east to live with his daughter. It's not much, 160 acres, small cabin, some water rights, but it borders your brother's land to the west." Tessa watched him steadily, waiting. "I've been saving," he continued. "Nearly 7 years of wages. Never had reason to spend much. It's enough for the land and some cattle to start." "Why the change of heart?" she asked softly. "You've always said cowboys don't put down roots." Beau took a deep breath. "Because I was wrong. Because watching you build something here, the school, community, connections, made me see there's courage in staying, not just in moving on." He stepped closer. "Because I love you, Tessa Ellis, and I want to build something with you, however long it lasts." Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears. "7 months ago you rescued me from a storm, Beau Zimmerman. But you've been saving me every day since, showing me I wasn't foolish to come west, to believe in possibility here. And you've been rescuing me right back," he said hoarsely. "From a loneliness so deep I'd stopped noticing it. From the fear that kept me running." When he knelt on the soft grass, pulling his mother's simple gold ring from his pocket, Tessa's yes was immediate and certain as the sunrise. They married in September of 1880, a simple ceremony in the schoolhouse Tessa had fought for. Hargrove himself attended, leaning heavily on a cane, his gift a set of schoolbooks and a grudging apology. The celebration afterward brought together ranch hands and miners, settlers and townspeople, the fractured community finding common ground and celebrating one of their own. The Zimmerman homestead flourished under their joint care. Beau's eye for landscape translated to smart land management, while Tessa continued teaching until their first child arrived in 1881, a daughter with her mother's blue eyes and her father's quiet determination. A son followed 2 years later, and by 1885, their modest cabin had expanded to accommodate their growing family. On their 5th anniversary, Beau took Tessa back to the lined shack where they'd first sheltered from the storm. He'd maintained it over the years, a private retreat and reminder. They sat outside as evening fell, watching distant lightning illuminate the mountains while their children slept safely inside. "Do you ever miss the wandering life?" Tessa asked, her head resting against his shoulder. "Not once," Beau answered truthfully. "Every storm I weathered alone taught me to survive. But you taught me to live." He tightened his arm around her. "This land still takes. Crops fail, winters kill, nothing's guaranteed. But what we've built together, that's stronger than any storm." In the distance, thunder rolled across the Wyoming sky, but inside the small cabin, warmth and family kept the darkness at bay. A light kindled by two people who had found in each other not just love, but a courage neither had known they possessed until they found themselves reflected in the other's eyes.